Well, it's a new year and there's a new opposition party in town in the legislature. And right beside me is the leader of that party, John Rustad, the leader of the Conservative Party of BC. And we're going to talk about some of the current events that British Columbians care about. Thanks for being back on Rebel News.
My pleasure, Drea. Thanks for having me on.
You're in the Lower Mainland, so it was nice to catch your attention for a minute here. I want to start with what happened last October. I would say that this time last year, nobody would have suspected that you would come as close as you did to taking the one-seat majority government away from David Eadie's NDP, but you did. Basically, the party came back from dead in some ways from over a century. So it's clear your party did many things good in the election, but let's talk about what you think could have done better or maybe what you did wrong.
Well, first of all, what we were able to achieve in British Columbia has never been done before. In a year and a half, it took a party basically from zero to official opposition, the largest opposition in BC's history. We have the largest percentage of women elected in a Conservative caucus anywhere in the country. We have about 20% of our 22% of our MLAs now are ethnic minorities. What we did is redefine conservatism in British Columbia, if not in Canada, in terms of the coalition that we brought together of the various groups. And so it's been quite a remarkable journey. And when you look at it and think, okay, what could have been done different? There's tons of things you could look at, everything from small, large things. One of the things I think made the biggest difference actually was when Kevin Falcon decided to suspend the BC United campaign. That would obviously give us a big boost. But if he had have done that 3 months earlier, we would have had a tremendous opportunity to look at nomination races and change how the fundraising would have gone. It would have actually put us in a very different situation going into the election from what we had. I'm not blaming it on that because obviously these things unfold as they unfold. But it was one of the big challenges that we had as a party is when you're building something from scratch, you don't have the base, you don't have the team, you don't have the donor base, you just don't have the infrastructure. And so we were building that every step along the way as we went. And a lot of that came together really in the last few weeks going into the campaign and still building all the way through the campaign. And so it's remarkable where we got to. I'm very proud of what we've been able to achieve, but we're still in a building phase.
So in some ways, you're saying you ran out of time. And speaking of time, the election that we just had took a lot of time to get the results. And do we even still have them? One of the things I covered very closely at our special website called bcelectionintegrity.com is the many discrepancies we saw. I would say at some level, a level of incompetence that we saw. I think people, like the people watching, were really watching BC elections closely. You said, thank you very much for the hard work that the officials with BC's elections did, but you did say that there should be some sort of independent review into that. Tell us what's the latest. Have you learned any other things the public should know about the election and how it was handled, and what you're actually going to do to try to make that review a reality?
So we've seen a lot of things since the election in terms of what has gone on, what went on. It's one of the reasons why we called for an independent review. David Eby saying he wants an all-party review, but that's basically just government and control. Elections BC says they're going to do an internal review, but an internal review of your own problems doesn't make any sense. So we have seen significant amount of problems in terms of the election, in terms of potential issues that raise up. And so in the coming weeks, we are going to be unveiling the information that we found. And we'll see how that plays out. But certainly it doesn't change my perspective. Matter of fact, it strengthens my perspective that an independent review of the election, of Elections BC, and quite frankly of our Elections Act in terms of what it's doing and to be able to make sure that people in British Columbia can have the confidence in an election in British Columbia and the organization that runs them.
Well, we'll definitely be following that closely. You can see my coverage on that already, again, at bcelectionintegrity.com. Now, let's talk about the NDP-Green coalition that British Columbians are just about to experience. David Eby, the Premier, announced that the two parties had come to agreement. I do know that for some of your supporters, that's almost scarier than just an NDP government. So tell us what you think that partnership is going to mean for British Columbians and how you plan to be able to be in opposition in spite of it.
Look, we have 44 people in the legislature, good people that have been elected from around the province. They are going to be very hard at work holding our government to account, as will I. And so we can make things pretty challenging in the legislature to be able to get things done. Whether they've got 47 votes or 49 votes makes no difference. We'll still be able to do lots of things. There are some things that we want to move forward, for example, that we think the Green Party would support. So there is a biorefinery or refinery in Prince George that produces a biodiesel. They produce that from canola oil, as well as from animal fat and cooking oil and things like that. That is a viable opportunity with the carbon credits structure that David Eby's put in place. Now, whether we should have those carbon credits is a different issue. We have that structure in place. However, because of the way they have done this, there are companies in the United States that are getting production credits in the United States down in places like Louisiana and Georgia, shipping diesel all the way to British Columbia and then getting paid credits from the British Columbia government. It's completely asinine. It should never be happening. Those credits should be there to help our industry being able to do these things, not to have Americans coming up taking advantage of it. And so we've got a bill to solve that problem. And I know the Green Party would be interested in doing that because they're interested in in supporting local businesses in British Columbia as well, particularly businesses that are producing that kind of a product. So there are places that we will be able to work with the Green Party on to try to force things and move things forward. There's obviously things that we're not going to be working on. We want to get rid of the carbon tax. That's obviously a priority of us to do. They want to keep it. They want to see it grow. And I can promise you this, on April 1st, it will not be an April Fool's joke when David Eby raises the carbon tax again in British Columbia.
Now, I know as Rebel News, we cover the other side of the story, and something that the legacy media totally ignores is the other side of the story to why parents are so fed up with our controversial sexual orientation, gender identity program called SOGI 123. Now, when you became the leader of the party, you went into the legislature guns a-blazing, and you raised that issue. And I know many people, many parents who had been labeled as bigots and full of hate were so excited to see that happen. But yet I cover these stories almost weekly, where parents are trying to get whether it's sexually explicit books out of the school, while they're trying to just be aware of what type of sexual things are going to be taught to their child so they can be prepared for these conversations. Or more commonly, why can't they opt out? Why can't they just keep their kids home that day? And they're always confronted with the fact that in 2016, our BC Human Rights Code was amended to incorporate gender identity. So whenever they come up against something, they're told this is a human rights. Now, not all provinces have this. Is this something, as a parental rights defender, that you would consider repealing if you do form government next time?
Yes. The reality, from my perspective on our education system, is there is sexually explicit material, which most people would consider pornography, that is being made available in our schools. And that may not be in every school, but it is being made available in our schools. And I think that's wrong. I don't think that is what we should be doing. And so from my perspective, that type of material should be taken out of schools. And people say, oh, you're going to ban books. Yeah, I'm going to ban books like that. I'm not going to have books in our schools that have sexually explicit material available to young kids. I don't think that's right. And so this is something that we're going to continue to fight, and we're going to be continually pushing this government on. Because just like, for example, last year, we also moved forward an act called the Fairness for Women and Girls in Sports Act, where we believe that biological men should not be competing against women and girls. It's a safety issue. It's a fairness issue. It needs to be addressed. We need to be able to protect not just trans rights, but women's rights. Make sure that women have their rights, have their safe places. Women should have their safe places, washrooms. A washroom for girls should not be shared with an adult male. Like, I'm sorry, that should not be happening. So these are the things that we're going to continue to fight. But I tell you, though, the big thing we need to push on is this. With 1/3 of people in this province thinking about leaving, and 1 in 2 youth thinking about leaving this province, we need to be holding the government account for what is happening with affordability, with the crime, with our economy, and the fact that, quite frankly, it looks like we're heading for a recession, and we are not prepared for it. We have a massive deficit. We're in real trouble. This government has put this province at real risk going forward.
Speaking of being in trouble financially, the word tariffs comes to mind, as it is for many across the board, across the country. Now, Premier David Eby has come out and said he's prepared to take a retaliation approach should President-elect Trump go ahead and impose the 25% increased tariffs on us. What do you think should be the right approach, and how are you going to address that in government?
Well, David Eby likes to talk a good game. He likes to lie. He lies all the time. And that's just the reality. We saw that in spades all the way through the election. And I don't mind calling him a liar, even though I hate using that word. For him to say that they're going to take retaliatory measures against Americans, exactly what is it we're going to be doing? It's like taking a pop gun to a gunfight, right? I mean, there's no chops. There's nothing that he could actually do that the Americans would say, oh my gosh, right? And so we have a big problem. But more importantly, you look at what Trump has asked for. He said, you guys got to secure your borders. You guys got to deal with this fentanyl issue. We should be doing that for British Columbians. Yeah. We should be doing that to help Canadians. We shouldn't be, another country coming and saying, you guys are a basket case when it comes to this stuff. You got to deal with it. Because that's what Trump's essentially saying. So, quite frankly, David Eby is refusing to do the job that needs to be done to protect people in British Columbia, which, by the way, is only the right thing to do for us and will help deal with our trade issues with the Americans. Now, there's some other issues we need to deal with, and we can get into softwood lumber as well. But the NDP have had 7 years, and they've done absolutely nothing to solve softwood lumber, and you think they have an ability to do something about trade? I mean, these guys don't have a clue what they're doing. Plus, to top it all off, they closed all of our trade offices around the world. So if we wanted to diversify our trade away from the Americans, they've actually taken our ability away to do that in their actions. I mean, these guys have absolutely taken every step possible to destroy the economy in British Columbia, and it's very, very sad.
Well, speaking of our drug problem, the highly contended public health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, I guess lives on for now under the BC NDP. Now, your party made it clear you would have her fired. You had a petition out to do that. I'm interested when I look at our neighbors in next door in the U.S. at Trump's party and who he appointed. I'm curious if you had any ideas of who you would have replaced Bonnie Henry with and why.
So I did not have anybody in mind, and I believe very strongly you don't measure the drapes up before you move in and take over the place. So obviously we needed to win before we would worry about who should come in and do that. But I can tell you what we would be looking for in terms of somebody to fill that role. First of all, somebody who believes that bodily autonomy, that informed consent is a requirement of healthcare. Somebody who believes in bringing an end to the fentanyl crisis in British Columbia and not perpetuating drugs and handing out these free drugs in our society. Somebody who believes that we should not be, giving drugs like these dangerous drugs to kids. And so that's just the basics. And then on top of that, of course, there's lots of structural change within British Columbia. I would be looking for somebody who is going to help to be an agent of change for our healthcare system. People look at healthcare and they think, oh, we've got this wonderful system. Ask yourself this simple question. Why is no other country in the world following what we do? North Korea comes close, okay, but let's leave that one out of there. But why is no other country in the world following what we do? Because we have one of the worst healthcare systems and the second most expensive in the world. So what we really need to be doing is we need to make sure that we bring in people within our government that are going to be the agents of change, that are going to look at models that actually work in the world and not be afraid to bring about change for the betterment of patients and people in British Columbia.
And we should point out that at one point we did have people looking to us when it came to our care for cancer patients, and now they're fleeing the province to try to save their lives, sometimes 3-4 times over. Let's end this interview on a nice note. How do we get closer together? The last time you and I talked, we actually talked about a sort of, I would call it a moral rift that was happening within your party over something. I know the NDP isn't perfect too. They have their own issues going on. How are you going to resolve unity within your own party and try to do that for British Columbians as well?
It's a big challenge, there's no question. But at the core of who we are, at the core of British Columbians, I think we all have many things that are in common. You know, we want to deal with drugs in our street. We want to end crime. We want to make sure that our kids can afford to live here and build a future in British Columbia. We want to make sure that people have jobs, that we have a strong economy. We need to get spending under control. Maybe that's only a select group that want to do that. Obviously, the left doesn't seem to care about that sort of thing. These are the things that we have in common. These are the things, certainly as Conservatives, that we want to be able to push through and make sure that we can deliver for people. And whether it's your rural BC or whether it's an urban BC, whether it's younger voters, whether it's older voters, they all have similar desires to see these things. So yeah, are we going to have some differences and issues on specific things? Of course we are. What family doesn't have that? But we are going to be very focused on making sure that we're fighting for those values that people want to see and that hope of a future that people want to be able to have for British Columbia.
Well, there you have it, leader of the Conservative Party of BC in the new year, 2025. And I'm Drea Humphrey with Rebel News. Until next time. At Rebel News, we don't back down from bringing you the other side of the story, and I've been happy to do that when it comes to the matters of the election as well. You can keep up with my latest reports at bcdecides.com while we still wait, and if you appreciate the work that we brought you on this election, please consider chipping in a few bucks through the donation tab while you're there.